live, and she just, there we go, we're live. Hey, everybody!
Oh, my God, she's plugging in.
Dude, you were talking about porn and vape wax. I had to turn it on.
I don't think anybody was talking about that.
I think everyone's talking about it,
and
I was talking about board games.
Out of nowhere, SPSM land, out of nowhere.
We've got a minute before we're like, really, you're starting? This is the
wow. You want to make these self-disclosures like this? It's fine. I think the rest of us, we love you when we want to get you help. We can help.
I have a 6-month supply of Rogaine.
There's good treatment. Baton Rouge. Baton Rouge has really good treatment centers. We can help you.
Sure.
We have a treatment center, and they're so excited that they have a regular phone line now. True.
Excellent.
Wow. So what do you guys
America, the most solid.
Everyone's joining us. We'll give it a minute. Have you guys? I've been working on our Twitch channel.
You said you were expanding your Twitch to accommodate the show, or the what was the
I worked on the Doc Foreman Twitch and the SPSM Twitch today.
Yeah.
Because the old SourceFed gang is all moving over to Twitch. They've decided what to do. And there are like a lot of monetization features, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. I'm all about the monetization features.
Twitch likes money.
I like money too.
Sure.
Bart says my hair is like money.
We know. We learned about your bag habits recently, and to be quite honest, Chris and I actually spent about an hour debriefing on. Really, it was quite. We were all just a little. I don't know about you, Tony.
Kate Hardy was horrified, and Ashby from Trevor, like she saw one that like it was golden sequins that she was like, close that tab and do not buy it. Which, by the way, Ashby girlfriend, thank you for looking out for me. Tony Wood shares your feelings about the gold sequin bag. You didn't like
the
bingo.
I did, and I did. I really wasn't.
$750.
I did not buy that. It was a deal. It's normally $2,000, and it was in the Nordstrom Rack. It was a Balenciaga, and we're live. Balenciaga.
We've been live.
We've been live. This is anticlimactic. I don't really.
I know. We're not talking about porn and vaping or Balenciaga. We're here to talk about suicide prevention in social media. You've walked into the hashtag SPSM suicide prevention in social media chat. We're like halfway through the last spring season or spring portion of season 5, and we were going to be ending. This is like the classic version, so drink it up while you can. We are already working on our Twitch channel that will be going hot next fall. We're excited about changing what we're doing, but we're going to be kicking it old school for another couple months, heading into AAS, and we've got all sorts of fun stuff for you tonight. Today, we're going to be talking about gaming, which is another reason why Twitch was on my mind, because I was watching walkthroughs. We're going to be talking about the suicide guy. Because we were talking about gaming, we brought in SPSM alum, Bo, just wave hi real quick. Bo Pinkham, he's going to introduce himself in a minute, who is one of our resident experts about gaming and suicide, and we're going to talk about all sorts of things. Bo was busy judging me on my like that. I have the dork versions of dork like board games.
No, I mean, it's fine. It's fine.
Apparently, even when I'm being a nerd, I'm a basic bitch.
Now wait, what happened to Bo? Earlier, Bo was roasting you over your game choices. Now we're live on the air, and all of a sudden, Bo he's retracted his. Where are you at, Bo? What happened? That was a big flip flop.
Yeah, now there are people watching me, and I'm obviously not going to say the things I said earlier because I'm.
but the things that you said are really enjoyable, and Tony and Chris and I were really excited.
Well,
and now we've gone completely right. What happened?
That was then. This is now. So
really quickly, we're going to do introductions because we want to get into the gaming that we really do, and we're going to talk a little bit about that and about what we do or don't know. As some of us are millennials and some of us are not. Like, I actually know how to use it. Like we have Steam accounts in the house, and so this is not unfamiliar territory for me. But we have a gaming house. I'm at Doc Foreman, your friendly moderator. I'm on the executive board of the American Association of Suicidality. I'm a psychologist, and I'm here. Hey, everybody, hi. And Mr. Tony Wood, say hi to the people.
Hi, everybody. I'm the co-founder of SPSM, you lucky ducks. And I'm also the CEO of Quantify, QNTFY.com, as well.
The coup?
As,
I thought that was the coup. The coup?
It was.
That's a game.
It was. We've transitioned away from that, and we've transitioned into Quantify out of the old. The old stuff is old, the new stuff is new. OurDataHelps.org, donate your data today. Also, the chair of the board of the American Association of Suicidology, suicidology.org. Join up. Join now. Join early, well, a little bit early, for the conference in April, which I'm sure Chris Maxwell will have more.
Which is already, we're already breaking record attendance numbers, and we had a record attendance last year, which is awesome.
Well, thank goodness that you shared that before Chris could start speaking.
And by the way, Ren, thank you. I will totally, Ren, the bag was a poppy, like one of their Searchlight totes in like gold sequins. It's awesome.
This is not introductions, April.
I know, I'm just responding to Ren's
This is rando.
Bert, say hello to the people.
Oh, hi, Dr. Bart Andrews. I am the Vice President of Telehealth, Home and Community Services at a groovy little crisis agency in St. Louis, Missouri called Behavioral Health Response. I also am honored and privileged to serve on the American Association of Suicidology Board of Directors, and really excited about the show because we really need to be talking about video games and suicide. We had Stack Up. Right? Stack Up?
StackUp.org. I was on your Twitch channel hanging out today.
So, and I think this ties in really nicely to that. And I love having Bo on the show because Bo, one, to be quite honest, if folks in SPSM land don't know this, April, it really kind of dominates the group and we're all afraid to give her grief. Bo comes on board and just like, bam, he's just like roasting her, but he did kind of lose it there when we went live. So I don't know. We'll see how this turns out.
We forgive him for that because we're all terrified. She interjects whenever she likes.
She
starts talking about her bag choices. Just like this.
Travis Atkinson's
Just like this. This is an exact example of what I'm talking about.
Bo Pinkham or Bull from Night Court. If you know who Bull from Night Court is, and I like a tall man, I really do. Then you grew up at the same time as me. Go vote with Travis Atkinson right now, and everyone say hello to Chris Maxwell.
What was President Hoover really like, April?
He was good in bed.
Good to hear. Good to hear.
He's from Iowa.
Real mover.
The best lovers are from Iowa. Chris Maxwell.
Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Maxwell. I would also like to point out one of Travis's other tweets about breaking the mammogram record tonight, and I said that we should probably try to avoid that.
Mammogram.
And we didn't. So, I'm Chris Maxwell, everybody. I'm communications coordinator for the American Association of Suicidology. As we've been talking about, we have a conference coming up in April 18th through 21st. You can sign up, you can register by going to suicidology.org. I just tweeted out the link as well. It's the suicide prevention conference. It's the suicidology conference of the year. If you are interested in suicide prevention, any of that, if you're in the field, this is the place to be. So
also, there'll be like SPSM parties, and I'm bringing a fog machine
and laser lights.
Do you have I don't have laser lights. We talked about doing a black light glow stick slip and slide, but I'm not clear about the weather being adequate for setting it up outside.
We can find a party store and hook up some lasers. I'm confident in that.
I have a party ball with the stuff.
My request for sharks with lasers has been turned down by the conference committee 2 years in a row. I just want to point that out.
SPSM can get it done, Bart. We love you. And Chris, can you just introduce the topic and Bo for us?
Yeah. I mean, Bo's fine. But so this came up. We mentioned it briefly at the end of the show last week. But I had seen a review video from one of our favorite YouTube groups called Funhouse, where they were playing this game called Suicide Guy. And this is a game that came out last summer that basically you just get to play as a guy who is falling asleep and has to wake himself up via various weird suicide puzzles. and he has to wake himself up to catch the beer that's falling off of the couch that he's sitting on. So it's a really, really edgy kind of feel for a game. Not a very smart topic, but yeah, that's the theme. So Bo Pinkham, if you want to introduce yourself, your badass self, sir.
Yeah, hi. I'm Bo Pinkham. I'm brought on now and then when they don't have other guests lined up. Which is fine.
Wow,
and, I'm here to talk to
but fair.
Are you the like who does that in other like are you the Joan Rivers of our like late night show?
Sure, there's probably baseball people like pinch hitters or whatever, but baseball is a horrible sport that's boring, so I don't know anybody in that. It is if baseball was a surgery, it'd be a vasectomy. It's just one of the worst things in the world. Anyway,
Royals.
Anyway, no, yeah, nobody cares. Anyway, I'm with the Crisis Center of Johnson County, and I'm Director of Crisis Intervention Services there. I'm also on the Contact USA board. Some of you might be familiar with them.
How many do we really have? 4 Kansans on tonight in a token Missourian?
He's from Iowa.
I'm from Iowa.
Why was I thinking? Oh, is there a Johnson County?
It's kind of the Kansas of the North. It's the Kansas of the North. I think we can all.
But
interestingly enough,
Kansas of the North, isn't it? I mean,
no, Kansas is the Kansas of the South.
All right, sure. That's
Utah's the Kansas of the West. Utah's the Kansas of the West.
Indiana was the Kansas of the South.
Utah's the Kansas of the West.
Bo, tell the people why we've invited you on today.
Yeah, I'm here to talk about suicide in video games, including this Suicide Guy video game, which I looked into briefly when I was invited on, and I watched that video you all linked. And my impressions are it's not worth $25.
Is that what Steam is charging for it? Because I saw the walkthrough, and it is not a $25 game. You were right.
It's $5 now.
Is it $5 now?
It better fucking be $5.
And
whoa,
that's ridiculous.
And what we found out earlier is that on Steam, at least, it has a 9 out of 10 rating with over 250 reviews. So it's
what are those reviewers? Russian bots?
Are those all sock monkeys?
Steam doesn't catch all those. It's one of their big issues is they can't catch all the bots reviewing and liking things.
Are you serious? Because
Steam.
Because that game,
like, with that.
Yeah, that game had some really serious functionality issues from it being like sort of a puzzle solving game. Like, and I'm now, and full disclosure, I'm a Myst fan from like the very first one way back, and so maybe my bar is a little high, but it's not great. It's not that clever.
It's a horrible game.
Yeah, like even like some of the free like escape the room games from like online, I think are like better than the $5 Steam version of the Suicide Guy. And we're not here to pan the Suicide Guy because we don't like how they use suicide as a plot device. We don't. But it also, if you watch the walkthrough, it only takes an hour to go through 25 levels, and it's sort of a miserable game.
Yeah,
but it's a cute. It's sort of a cute premise, sort of.
I mean, I didn't the video didn't really make it clear to me that he's trying to wake up, right? So I don't know if that takes the edge off like the whole suicide thing, because I've heard that conceit before that the only way to wake up from a dream you can't wake up from is to like try to harm yourself or kill yourself, whatever. I mean, it did get me thinking about the whole idea of what would a good game about suicide look like. Right? What would representation for suicide?
That one game though that they had earlier, that with the girl that kept like repeating in time.
Life is Strange.
Life is Strange. Yeah, that was like good.
But it wasn't. That wasn't the suicide was a component of.
Yeah, it wasn't the conceit. It wasn't the whole reason for it.
Ooh, the conceit. Is that fancy game development terminology?
Sure, I don't even know if I'm using it right. But I'm just going to fake it, and everyone out there is going to be fine with it.
I bought it.
But so there's that other game, and I'm pretty sure it's called Hellblade or whatnot, right?
Okay.
Cessna's Revenge, something like that. And that was a representation of I mean, first of all, it had a lot of fantasy elements or whatever, but it was supposed to represent like a psychotic disorder of some kind, where this woman would hear like delusions or whatnot, and it affected gameplay. And I have not played it because I'm poor, but it was supposed to be really great. So then I tried to be thinking about like, well, you know, could we do that with suicide, just suicide? Because Suicide Guy is not doing it. So what would it look like for us as a community to see good representation of suicide as the central concept around a game? Is that possible?
So there was another game. Des had shared this when we did our presentation last year, but it's called something like the Mirror or the Mirror game.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's not what we're used to now for video games. It's more of the Commodore 64 kind of era style, where you're presented with a picture on screen and you have text, and then you have to like.
You mean like the Oregon Trail?
One option, kind of, but it's a really great depiction of both depression and reaching that point where you think that you might want to take your life, and it really kind of dives into some of the motivation that someone might be feeling. So yeah, that's the Oregon Trail, right? So that to me, I thought was a decent enough representation. But how do you then translate that into a game that would be engaging or intriguing for people who are used to these really immersive style games? I don't know what that would look like.
Yeah, what would a AAA game then look like? That's all about suicide.
What is AAA?
It was AAA is basically those. It's like summer blockbusters. It's the big budget titles from large producers. So when you think of like, God, I don't know, Halo series, Assassin's Creed, Grand Theft Auto, like all that stuff. The stuff that people who don't even play video games can still name now and then are usually AAA.
Call of Duty, Battlefield,
World of Warcraft.
Which makes me think too, if a AAA studio came out with a game that had suicide as a theme, how would they try to microtransaction it? Like, how would they try to fuck with it? Like you have to pay a certain amount of money to gain your life back to start over. I don't know. And are there ethical questions with how that would be portrayed?
I mean, there are games like that already, but the difference now is that they don't tell you to like kill yourself or whatever. There just might be benefits from starting over, and you have to pay for it.
So Ren is tweeting about a game called Inner Vision. You guys heard about this? You talk to suicidal avatars.
Inner Vision, no.
Yeah. Now, Bart, while we're looking at that, Bart, you actually did some wonderful research for tonight, and you were looking at research because one of the things that I was sort of whining about was, well, we don't, a lot of these questions about do games about suicide, do they have the potential of increasing acquired capability or putting some people at risk? And of course, I'm like, well, that's an empirical question. We don't have enough research. And you said, well, we do have research. So Bart, while we're looking up Inner Vision, why don't you comment?
I'm glad to. I think also, interestingly enough, Dan Carlin in his Hardcore History, and if you guys aren't familiar with Dan Carlin and Hardcore History, you should be familiar with that podcast. He did a beautiful podcast that was just released called Harmfotainment, I think is what it's called. Painfotainment. Painfotainment. And one of the things that he talks about is that one of the things that's abundantly clear is that our sensitivity to violence is at the highest it has ever been in world history. And he does this beautiful look back on how incredibly violent and comfortable with violence and pain we were prior to the 20th century. And yet our videos and our movies are increasingly violent, but yet we're becoming less violent at the same time, right? So he makes a really good point that in fact, that these sublimations and our entertainment has no relationship with violence, and that maybe it may work the other way. That in fact, as we saturate our environment with these violent images and themes, that we may become actually increasingly sensitized and less likely to engage in violent behavior. Mm-hmm. So the idea that video games like the Suicide Guy or games or books that have suicide themes increase the likelihood that people will have acquired capacity. I'm quite skeptical of that. I think it might in fact be the opposite. And one of the things that I really do, I make no bones about this. I think the safe messaging agenda is far exceeds the data that we have. And if you are online a lot, if you get on Reddit, if you get on different places, you see that a lot of people are talking openly and honestly about suicide in ways that the safe messaging community would lose their shit over. But they find it therapeutic and helpful. If you go to Suicide Watch, for instance, on Reddit, the way that people talk about suicide in a very open way, and they find that releases and helps them cope. So I really do think that we're overly concerned about the impact of media, and what we should be concerned about is why are we there's the research, we're gaining consensus that in fact violent video games do not cause kids to be more violent. There is no evidence to suggest that extremely violent video games make kids more violent. And yet we even had the president of the United States touting bad science in this crap recently. And so we have. Are
you agreeing with Donald Trump because you don't like safe messaging?
No, he actually said that video games made people violent. He's actually spewing crap.
I'm so sorry. I for a minute there, I about wet myself, Bart. But keep still continent. Thank God. Keep going.
I mean, it happened several times a show. I think I know that Travis wouldn't know if you're going to work in mammograms at any point.
Mammograms.
Thank you. I think we just need to keep that trend going.
Rudy Caceres was mentioning Suicide Simulator on Steam. Does anyone know anything about that?
I looked up a really quick review of it on YouTube, and it looks like that one is not puzzle based. It doesn't have like a purpose to it other than to just find different ways to kill yourself. So like you're presented, there's a tower in the middle of the thing, there's a minefield that you become aware of, so you basically just choose different ways to kill yourself.
Okay.
So that's fun.
Bo, you actually had some commentary. So you were looking up some of the games that we've been mentioning on Steam, and you actually had some commentary on how these games came to be. And we're going to talk a little bit about Suicide Guys sort of being lumped in with all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think I talked about this last time I was on here when I talked about video games, where just communities like Steam and GOG and other things like that, they incentivize these small indie crap games to be like produced and sold for like, I mean, if Suicide Guy did drop to $5, thank goodness, but I mean, it probably started at 25. And it's kind of the culture of Steam right now that they're trying to crack down on it, but there's just all this shovelware, which is just these crap games just get made and then just thrown out there. And the way to get your shovelware differentiated from everyone else's is to use stuff like Suicide, to kind of get to the top of the crowd, so to speak. And what's interesting is with Steam, you can do stuff like Suicide Simulator or Suicide Guy, but I mean, other topics that are technically like verboten or whatever, like rape or whatnot, like will absolutely get axed immediately, without question. But
because it's in 4K, right?
Allowed. And to Bart's point, like I don't think that these games are harmful. Really, I mean, well, first of all, because they're all crap, and people, no matter what they're going through in their no matter what they're going through in their life, people know what crap is, right? And they're like, "This is crap. Like this doesn't speak to me at all."
So even if they're crap, I mean, so Rin was pointing out that I guess there's some research going on down at FSU where they're looking at, and we knew this was coming, Bo, virtual reality games where people can experience a suicide attempt.
Yeah.
Initiate a suicide attempt. So, so even if they're crap games now, what about when you like just notch up the immersiveness?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's rough. Yeah. I don't know. That will be the next interesting focus on the research, I imagine, is just like if you can literally recreate a suicide with everything but the actual death involved with it, then what does that do to you? And does that make you more likely to make an actual attempt? Less likely? Who knows?
Thank goodness our risk assessments are solid.
Hey, so first of all, I want to do a big shout out to Geek Therapy, who's been tweeting. I was on your Twitch channel also today. Katie Gordon was saying to Bart Andrews' point about video games and violence and the lack of proof that they're relating, and she tweets out the scholar's open statement to the APA Task Force on Violent Media. So Bart is up. I know that you're doing a lot of things. Is it possible for you to look at that and maybe respond to Katie if we give you a minute?
Yeah. So I did see the tweet that there was a small association with fearlessness about death, and I think it's interesting. The question is, does an attitude of fearlessness towards death translate to increases in behavior? And I think that's what the research is real. I mean, that's always the real question. Do people's attitudes that we assess in these studies then lead to behaviors? And there's lots of reasons why people report certain attitudes, but those don't translate into behaviors. So it's fascinating. To date, the bulk of the research is suggesting that violent video games do not predict actual behaviors, right? Now, what the interplay is with that, with all kinds of other things, I think those are wonderful questions to find out about. But I think the real key point is, do violent video games lead to increased violent behaviors? To date, we're just not seeing that, right? And the video games are incredibly, incredibly violent, right?
And more realistic than they've ever been.
More realistic. And let's add, this is something people don't like to talk about. The rate of violence in this country has been dropping at a steady rate for years and years and years, right? We're becoming, as a nation, despite these incidents that get a lot of media attention, that are horrific and traumatic, I don't want to minimize that. No. We actually have a lot less violence in this country than we've ever had at any point in our history. Yeah. Interesting.
Per capita.
By the way, excellent point. So more and more video game playing, and the world is a less violent place. Bo, Rudy Caceres has also been tweeting out, and he's been talking. He said sort of an alternative perspective, which is somebody talks about quitting video games as a way of improving their mental health.
Yeah. What? Sorry, was there a question there? What?
Would you like to respond to that?
So, all right. Sorry, I can't see his tweet. Could you say it again?
So he tweets out an article, Game Quitters, from the verge of suicide, how quitting video games saved Jose's life. Oh. So there's a, from gamequitters.com. That's a whole thing, gamequitters.com. You've seen my house. We're not game quitters.
I mean, yeah, I mean, if you don't find video games are giving you what you need anymore, and if it's better for your mental health to not do them, then, I mean, that obviously makes sense. I probably shouldn't eat a pack of Snickers every day, but I do because it's what I need. No, I'm kidding. I don't do that.
They're really satisfying.
It's
I have a pack of Snickers ice cream bars in the freezer.
I mean, I guess I'd have to read the article to see what exactly this guy was playing, right? I mean, that's another thing that I've had to, we like Chris and I mean, now all of you, because you're about as good of experts as I am now. I mean, there's a huge thing about video games. Like, what do you mean when you say video games? Because when I say video games, it's usually AAA titles that I spend a lot amount of time on, and I've been playing a lot of Overwatch lately with my friends, which is a pretty.
It's not Animal Crossing Pocket Camp.
It's not. It's not these freemium games on mobile phones that ends up costing you and your family a ton of money or a ton of your time and whatnot. But so I mean, I don't begrudge anyone ending their relationship with video games so long as they think it's what's the best thing for them. But I mean, we've all probably encountered people who have tried to excise parts of their lives because they think those are the root cause of their underlying issues, only to find that they're not. There's been the whole thing with I think the World Health Organization is trying to define video game addiction disorder, or whatever they're calling it or whatnot. And there's been a lot of outcry about that because they're not really doing their due diligence on trying to define what this actually looks like. And part of the reason is they don't really define what video games are or what kind of video games they're actually like looking at about this, because there's a huge difference between something like Call of Duty and something like Animal Crossing Pocket Kingdom crap, whatever.
Rin said, it's other people's research and I don't want to misrepresent it. I just know that labs are starting to use alternate experimental paradigms, including use of virtual reality to examine suicide. Maybe stay tuned for presentations at AAS. I don't know. You'd have to ask Gray Tucker.
That'd be cool.
That would be cool. And of course, Katie Gordon wants to say she doesn't disagree with Bart too terribly much, but it's that fearlessness thing that that sticks out. And Rudy has tweeted, by the way, the Twitter's just blowing up with great tweets. 6 games that really get suicide, which we might want to take a look at.
Oh.
At Kotaku. What the F?
Kotaku, yeah.
What is that?
Kotaku.
It's one of my favorite video game websites. It's they also respond to my emails 1 out of 10 times. Thanks, Kotaku.
Ooh. You have sent 10 emails to a video game?
April, I send about like 10 emails a month to people in the video game industry, screaming into the abyss and pretty much never hearing anything back. I will give a shout out to the Geek Therapy folks who actually respond to emails and have been doing awesome stuff for a long time. But then there's other folks who I won't name by name because I'm being tactful. Who don't respond.
Hey, Bo, you want to take this?
Oh, it's a code. It was code. Anybody get that?
Yeah, yeah, take this.
No, I completely didn't.
Go ahead and take this, Bart.
Take that. Anyway.
What am I taking? What I don't.
Okay, Bart.
You always know what you're taking.
Bart, you should get on the take this board because you have like letters after your name and they might respond to your emails.
They might.
They might.
So, did you look at the 6 games they mentioned? Like,
yeah, let's take a look.
Games that get suicide. I'm trying to look at this, and these aren't games I know very well, but these are also kind of a lot of them like boy games.
What are boy games?
Boy games.
They're games that don't have a universal appeal to people who are more feminine. Like they're like definitely have a very masculine sort of identity point of view. And you can tell when you look at them.
You're going to be a hit on Twitch.
Well, I know. But I think, there's a lot of conversation among that in the gaming community about like.
Heavy Rain is on here.
And we want to be clear about something. Rudy pointed out a tweet, tweeted out a link about somebody who got better and their life was saved by stopping playing video games. When we talk about causes, we're really talking about large-scale group data that gets at, is there a relationship between variable X and variable Y? And I really think that we need to make an important distinction that doesn't mean individuals can't be impacted by any particular thing in a bad way or a good way. So the idea that some people could be impacted negatively by video gaming too much, or that video games can impact their mood negatively, absolutely, right? There are people that have bad reactions to coffee. So that certainly there are individuals that video gaming may not be an appropriate thing, and there are some people. Did you see this guy that was playing video games so long that he was paralyzed? Did you see that, right? Where he was sitting in a chair so long and he actually developed paralysis from playing video games so long without getting up and moving.
Was that in Japan?
Yeah, it was in Japan, I think. So look, there's no doubt that anything that people get engrossed by and consumed by, whether that's sex, whether that's drugs, whether it's video games, can certainly be impactful and damaging for that individual. That's a very different question than whether these things whole scale are bad for people and are predictive of things in terms of large data sets, which we just don't see. That doesn't mean some people can't really have bad experiences and shouldn't be doing that. So I want to clarify. Thank you for the tweet, Rudy, because that's important to clarify.
I don't think Bart breathed once. So, and by the way, Katie Gordon's still like conversing with you about that, Bart. So we're gonna switch things, but we're gonna come back to that because I think that you've got more to read. So Bo, did you get a chance to look at some of those at Kotaku? Like some of those
I actually remember reading the article now, but it's like from 4 years ago or so. And unfortunately, I haven't played a lot of these. But
how about Heavy Rain? That was a big one.
Oh, I even heard about that.
I stopped. That game is garbage. I stopped after the first game.
Rin says she hates the concept of boy games. We need more representation in video games. But that doesn't mean that some games should be promoted as gendered to highlight the issue. I don't think they're promoted that way. I just think that they are that way. And we know that. Like,
can we have Bo talk about Gamergate?
We probably should talk about Gamergate because
no, we don't have to know.
Because on the AS listserv there were some messages involving Gamergate a few weeks back that the person who was sharing them probably did not know that they were sharing stuff from Chronicles of Higher Ed that was inspired by Gamergate. and we should probably review that really briefly. Bo, can you explain Gamergate briefly?
Oh God. All right. Well, first of all, it's about ethics in video game journalism. Okay, it's not about gender or anything like that.
It is a little bit about gender because women were targeted because they were women.
Absolutely about a series of video game journalists who all happen to be female. Basically,
they weren't accidentally female. They got treated differently because they were female.
Yeah. Anyway, yes. Do you want to explain it, April? You seem on top.
Yeah, you've fallen into a classic April Foreman trap, Bo. We've all been there. We're gonna let you squirm just for a minute, but your deflection back to her was in fact correct. April, would you please like to tell the audience about Gamergate and the impact on women and how harmful it was? Thank you.
Hashtag me too. Go for it, Bo.
No, okay. Female video game journalists were treated like crap, mainly because they were female and had the audacity to think that they should be allowed to be adults and have relationships with others. So basically, it started with this really made-up, crappy, quote-unquote scandal where one female video game journalist was accused of giving good reviews to a guy's game because they were sleeping together, which was not at all what was happening. But then this woman was harassed online and kind of basically, I don't actually know what happened to her, but like basically driven out of the industry. And I think she's back in it now, but she had to take a long time off because it was so horrible. And so Gamergate kind of started this whole, I'll use the term alt-right thing where these guys, these generally male population decided that they needed to like dive into the horrors of video game journalism and really try to talk about its ethics, which was just a dog whistle for hating women, basically, and saying that female video game journalists were all awful or whatnot. And they gave it the hashtag Gamergate because that's hip and trendy. And that's what they did. And it was horrible. It was a it was a necessary thing, I would say, in the video game industry. No, sincerely, for us to grow up a little bit and figure out that like
they had to abuse women necessarily for men to grow up.
Huh? No, the scandal was necessary.
Oh, that it had to come out.
Yes.
Okay.
There you go.
For us to purge ourselves of these jackasses.
You just saw Bo being shaped to give the appropriate narrative that April wanted. Okay, so one of the interesting things
is enlightening. Wow, like your whole countenance changed. It was like
you got to watch out. Don't get her going. We don't want to discuss about pay differences among men and women.
To respond to blatant sexism accurately.
Here's some interesting things about Gamergate. Well, the research on Gamergate is fascinating. And actually Gamergate, the root of Gamergate was on 4chan, right? And so, and if folks don't know a lot about 4chan, I don't know a lot about 4chan. One of the things that we do know is there are a tremendous number of disaffected young men out there and who are basically being recruited. These are lonely, awkward, unhappy young men who are getting recruited and engaged in some really, really nasty stuff in some of these channels, right? And so these groups are forming, and so you see a lot of these really weird negative things bubbling out of some of these groups on 4chan. And what you see, and we saw this in Germany as well, you see disaffected youth who don't feel like they have a purpose or a role. They're getting recruited by other folks that might be a little more savvy, a little more experienced, and then they develop these really hate-filled campaigns that then spill out from 4chan onto Reddit and into other platforms, eventually on Twitter and even Facebook, right? And so there's this really interesting pattern. We have groups of young men who are really disconnected from, in a meaningful sense, from the rest of our communities, and we're having these pockets of really unhealthy things happening in some of these corners. I mean, that's a very real thing and something to be concerned about.
A lot of anger.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to unmute. We had a little feedback, and I'm trying to unmute Bo and Chris so that Bart didn't have any feedback. But yeah, there's a lot of sort of male anger that that did some destructive things from young males, and of course, Rin is saying be really, really careful about tagging that because like trolls will jump on you. Like there are people that are still sort of hot to go on that topic. And one of the things that sort of worries me related to suicide and to gaming and media is that people who are open about their lived experience might get jumped on, and that there is a certain element of picking on people perceived as vulnerable, which is, you know, Bo is right. There was a bit of that going on in the gaming community. If we're good with that, there was a question that was asked about suicide as a topic in board games. I didn't know if Elder Signs. I know that some of the Cthulhu stuff and like has suicide as like a topic as sort of going mad based on sort of response to sort of evil in some way. But what do you think, Bo?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about Dead of Winter is a zombie apocalypse game. So, and it's supposed to be like realistic when it's zombies, whatever. So, like, I mean, some of the events that can happen in that game talk about characters, you know, killing themselves because it's gotten too bad or because they lost a loved one or something like that. But like to literally just focus on just suicide in what we would call a realistic setting or whatnot, you know, without Cthulhu or zombies or anything like that, I don't know of anything. One of the things that I've wanted to focus my attention on is kind of the use of like role-playing games, like anywhere from Dungeons and Dragons to, God, I mean, just there's a ton of different role-playing games out there, and kind of identifying if that is a medium that you could explore suicide in a safe and constructive way. And I just have to dive more into that because I find the idea fascinating. I've personally been through what's called like one-shots, which is just the role-playing term for you're just playing this game one night and then you're done. We were talking about Fiasco earlier, and Fiasco is a one-shot game usually. And we have, all right, she's leaving. I'm going to keep talking. We have explored the idea of suicide in some of those games. There's some very adult role-play. Yeah, Fiasco. It's wonderful. If anybody likes fun games, it basically does a Coen Brothers movie in your living room and whatnot. But there's another game called Unknown Armies, which explores some very, very rough themes, so to speak, and we've explored the idea of suicide in them. None of the characters suicided or anything like that, but we've talked about it, you know, in game as our characters, and that was fascinating. That was a long time ago, but it was interesting.
So this your comment about even just D&D, but I mean the idea of having people sitting around playing board games in the same room, and the topic of suicide comes up. So just because I know this one better than most of the other ones, but say you're in the middle of a campaign with your party in a D&D setting, and the whole idea of D&D is that you can do whatever you want basically within the limits of what the dungeon master will let you do. So say that one of the characters goes on like a suicide run, or even more directly says my character is going to opt out and I'm done, and you know the creature I'm attacking kills me and or not doesn't kill me but wounds me and then I kill myself or something like that. What's that conversation going to look like when the topic of suicide is brought up with the other people in that party? Is that going to be a choice point for that person to be like, or for one of those people to say, you're talking about something pretty serious, I want to check in? How much of that kind of thing happens in that setting? But we've talked a lot about communities online too, with video games. And if you're in one of those, it's a very similar setting. Say you're on a role-playing game online with a bunch of other people and something very similar happens. What's the likelihood of that happening in that sort of community? What's the follow-up conversation after that?
Right. I think about one of the ones that I've been thinking about a lot. This isn't a tabletop game, but I don't know if we've talked about EVE Online on this forum, but EVE Online is it's basically this space World of Warcraft. Doesn't have like fantasy races or anything in it, but it's grown to the point where its in-game economy is so robust that when they have wars with each other or whatever, people are literally spending hundreds of thousands of dollars equivalent on these battles, and they can lose everything. And there's a wonderful article, and I wish I could find a link. I will try to find a link in a sec when I'm done talking or whatever. But there was a person who was infiltrating a group in this game for 2 years, and then eventually made off with, I want to say, like $2 million worth of stuff in this game. And so then it got me thinking, I mean, when that happens to you in the game, what happens to you offline when you're done, quote unquote? Like, I mean, is anyone from that game following up with you and being like, you just lost $200,000? Are you doing okay? Like, do you need to talk about it? These people are in guilds and clans and whatnot, but is the onus on the game itself to like provide those tools for people to get like any kind of counseling afterwards? That's the conversation that I want to have, because I don't know the answer. Should the game provide it? Does it have to be these in-game communities that are growing organically? Is it a combination?
I mean, clearly the in-game crisis doesn't affect a large number of people in real life. So you got a low base rate event.
Right.
We've had several things on the Twitter stream that I'm responding for. Someone was talking about, so Rudy was tweeting sort of the other side of the argument. I was depressed, anxious, and on the verge of suicide. Then Zelda, the Breath of the Wild saved me. And of course, I have kids who like, they live and die Zelda. They love Breath of the Wild, Ocarina of Time, all that stuff. And I think that we're showing that different storylines like have a different ability to touch people, much like different movies, things like that. We need a Steven Stack, but for suicide in video games.
I'm really intrigued again by something that Bo just said, and that like when you experience any part of one of the risk factors that we have identified for suicide, either in game or pre-game or during game, how that can affect people. So yeah, you have something like an event that creates some burden on you, or that you already have an increased acquired capability. Are you going to then choose more violent video games? Are you going to then enact a suicide event? So say you're in like a free roaming game like Grand Theft Auto 5, where you can basically do everything you can in Suicide Guy, but in a more intentional way. And so it'd be really interesting to look at if anybody's done any research on like if you have someone who has been flagged as at risk. Are they more likely in a free roaming game to kill themselves more, or act in more risky ways, or act in ways that put others in danger? I don't know. So like, where does acquired capability come in?
And I think that's an interesting question. We were talking about sort of prior to the show about the need for more research as, people are consuming digital content that is more like video games. And of course, Bo's right, defining what is a video game is harder, but people are playing more games than they've played. I think it's fair to say board game, digital content in all of its forms, people are spending less time watching broadcast television and more time consuming media that they choose and gaming that they choose digitally. And they're not being good empiric evidence, and certainly not much of it, and certainly not clinical trials. So like, we're asking a bunch of philosophical questions, and I'm busy thinking, me as a clinician, I don't really have time to wait until this comes out. I have patients with high risk for suicide that we have using video games as part of their crisis plan, right? Their Craig Bryan-esque like distraction. Well, if their distraction includes a game with content about suicide, and I don't know that because I don't ask, like, do you feel more like harming yourself or more like killing yourself after this game, or do you feel better? If we're putting that on, we're putting that on a crisis plan, because like assuming that they all impact people the same is like really hard to know, right?
Mm-hmm. We don't know. And so, it's interesting, John, Dr. John Ackerman just joined, and I always got insightful bits. We just talked about, okay, what about virtual reality? And if we make this more real and more real and more real, will this lead to acquired capacity? but we should research this, but we can't really research this because it wouldn't be safe, right? How do we do this? So this is one of the ironies. This is why I'm so incredibly disappointed in internal review boards and our approach to research. Our cultures and our society is changing rapidly. Technology and entertainment and the way that we experience the world is changing rapidly, and we're wrapped up in these really old school research designs that leave us way far behind of where the world is, right? Two, we have this general aversion to doing experiments that could be potentially problematic, and so we can't do these. They're unethical. Well, we have a problem here because that means the research is always so far behind where the world is at. That isn't that the unethical part, right? That we don't do research to learn more about these things more quickly and take these risks and learn the best way to do these things. Instead, we say we can't do that because it's unethical. And I say it's unethical to not have research like that so that we get ahead of the game rather than being so far behind it all the time. Because that's really, if you look at where our research is around these issues, we're so reactive and so far behind where things are going. By the time we learn things, the world's changed already. Things are already different than they were when we were doing the research.
I'm just going to give a shout out to Travis for a lovely compliment. And I know I keep breaking in. I'm just like trying to keep my finger on the feed because there's so much happening. Travis says SPSM should partner with an online university for college credit on suicide prevention and social work systems. These talks are so educational. Hashtag funny, smart, suicide experts. Thank you, Travis. Bart's like right in the middle of saying we need to change how we do IRBs because we're not approving enough research about suicide to the point of it becoming unethical. We're so worried about controlling what gets done that nothing's getting done. And that's not okay. Additionally, by the way, there's just not enough funding. So you have a volume issue. So in the middle of talking about video games, we're pointing out, I think, which is sort of a big system problem with research about suicide, in that people increasingly have digital lives. They have interactions with the digital content, and several people, and big shout out to Andy Brown, I believe he's another Kansan. Big shout out talking about, and Rin and other people about like people's gaming partners, their guilds and stuff being their social support, something that our group has talked about, that we have these digital relationships through games, through social media, that could be protective factors as well. So you might be playing a very violent video game, but you might be doing it with 12 of your friends. We talk about Stack Up, where people can get on with veterans that they may be close to or just may have some shared culture with anywhere in the world. Can't sleep in the middle of the night. There's a veteran maybe somewhere at another part of the world who's online ready to stream. And I mean, I was hanging out with Stack Up on Twitch earlier this afternoon. Like, absolutely, you can connect with people doing this. Like, it's like digital content is so plastic that it's not all one thing. So it's just impossible for it to have like a one directional correlational effect, right? Bo, you're nodding, so you get the camera.
No, I completely agree. It's, when I first started looking at suicide video games, one of the things I talked about, and I mentioned this the other time I was on here, was just things like these freemium crap games that are on your phone or whatever that you can download for free, but then you have to end up paying or whatever. They'll just give you a community right off the bat that and you don't really have control over it. You're connected with 20 other people, 20 strangers or whatnot. And that made me think, like, what if I talk to these people about like my suicide thoughts? Because, kind of mirroring chat, right? There's that online disinhibition effect, and people just open up in random spots about anything. Reddit, not even just Suicide Watch, but just random threads on Reddit will just people start talking about their suicide thoughts. But games are just so such a very interesting spot right now. Like you said, the plasticity of it, where we don't even know what we're talking about half the time with video games and what those communities look like or what they'll look like in 5 years, and where suicide enters into that. It's fascinating, also kind of scary for me.
Grace Durbin, I feel like I'm on the unpopular side of the fence in this chat. Grace, there isn't the good news is that this topic is so undefinitive. I don't think there's number one, a side or two with a fence. So just so she says, I think addressing suicidal themes in gaming is important. I think gaming is a valid coping skill. But I think simulating suicides or throwing the topic around in entertainment really bothers me. You know, I think Bo made a really good statement that on Steam that people doing rape simulation it's considered tasteless. And even though rape is a thing that happens and we, you know, want to have awareness and talk about it and destigmatize surviving one, that there's something about handling it, you know, treating it unsensitively that is not tolerated. But suicide, you know, insensitive treatment of suicide or possibly dangerous treatment of suicide is not something that worries people, and that should bother you. Bo, response?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with. I don't know if that was a tweet or something. I didn't see what you saw exactly. Okay, I didn't see it. But you're great, Grace. And I agree. Like in theory, like I also get bothered by these kinds of portrayals. But having been, I wouldn't say I'm a toxic male or anything, but I've spent time. No, sincerely, I may be slightly toxic, but I've spent time on 4chan. Right, and you know, and all these other tainted. No, sincerely, right? Because it's a horrible community, but I like their /TV. I like /TV. They're fun. Whether we like it or not, this is going to keep happening. Like and the entire point of the internet to a lot of people now is you don't get to tell me what is or is not good content. I will do whatever I want, and the more that you rail against that, the more I can put that into my way of marketing myself, and I will start making more money off your rage. So I don't know where we as a suicide prevention intervention community, I don't know our best way of intersecting with that and that mindset and trying to be like, hey, you don't have to do this. If you are going to do this, here's some ways that we can mitigate some of the stuff that we think might not be terribly great for some people. I mean, it's rough. We're not the only ones who've dealt with it too. I mean, Gamergate was a huge example of people who wanted gender equality and, you know, good treatment of women in the video game industry were lambasted by this alt-right group or whatnot. So I don't know. Now I'm just ranting.
Yeah, no, Jestel and Rainey had a really opposite-ish. I'm trying to stay on that path of not having sides because I totally agree. I think it's just a free-flowing conversation.
You're a Morbius strip. You're a Morbius strip, right? Mobius. Is it Mobius?
It's
the Mobius strip of this.
You got it.
I am Morpheus, and we are not taking the red pill tonight. So the opposite perspective, or a different perspective from Jess, was that she was talking about how having off-screen depictions of suicides was sometimes more unsettling for her than having something more accurately depicted. And I can only imagine. I think for me, because I feel the same way. It normalizes some of the pain and suffering that someone might be going through. It validates some of my own experiences. So what I took from that was, and paired with Grace's response, is that there's really not going to be a one size fits all solution to some of these things we're talking about. Like Bo said, we can work towards mitigating some of what frustrates and offends people and causes them pain. But I don't think we can necessarily cut everything out.
I think there's more data in these platforms than most researchers could possibly imagine. It also requires a set of skills that is not well represented in our research community at all.
Oh no, nobody prepared me to think about the fact that everybody would leave a digital trail and that we could research almost anything about human behavior because it would almost all have a quantified digital trail less than 20 years after I graduated. Nobody was ready for that in the 90s.
And the skills that are required to interact with these platforms are so different than the skills of the researchers that the gap has to be bridged through partnership at this point. There is no training program inside of the schools of our esteemed colleagues that facilitate this kind of communication between, and it's the place where the most groundbreaking social research is happening. Unfortunately, most of it is being used to engineer better games and better products and services. but they're behaviorally based. You know, this is all about keeping people engaged, trying to get those communities that Bo mentioned built fast and managed fast so that they can scale up fast. You know, shocker, there's a profit motive.
Yep.
I just realized, Tony, that IRBs are rent seekers. So that all of a sudden that's rent seeking. That's all of a sudden that's occurred to me. I think one of the things that's really fascinating to me is that there's all of this data and methods that people can use to sell a product or make a product more successful or more attractive. And we cannot use those same tools to look at how we use these things to improve healthcare or understand the impact on them, because there's so many barriers in the way of the research.
Well, and you wouldn't even know how. I mean, not you personally, but most of this country wouldn't have even the faintest idea how to do that.
Which again gets to me one of the my common complaints. People on the SPS have heard me this whole idea of departments have become, they're so sterile, and that you have psychologists in one department, social workers in another department, computer scientists in another department, and we really need multidisciplinary tracks so that we have cross-pollination. And I think that's one of the things why we see we're so far behind, because the tech folks have accelerated with the movement, and all of us psychology and social workers were way behind the 8 ball, and we're not going to catch up. I don't think we're ever going to catch up.
Speaking of cross-pollination, we're at final thoughts. We have 1 minute, 5 people. Bart Andrews, go.
Final thoughts. I always love having Bo on the show. This was a fascinating topic. The Twitter thread was hopping. Thank you all. Love you all.
Bo Pinkham.
Hi, I'm Bo.
Good one, Bo.
That's it.
Chris,
that was excellent.
Go register for the AAS conference in April. We have a lot of work to do in terms of video games and suicide, and we have a lot of data to collect and research to do and people to save.
Tony Wood.
It's all about money. Follow the money. And for the eccentric billionaire out there that wants to create a new program that cross-pollinates these silos and just waste your money.
Create synergy.
Hey everybody, I'm at Doc Foreman. This hour went so fast that it took me till 9:58 to realize we hadn't gotten to final thoughts. We very quickly said Suicide Guy was just a bad game. It was insensitive treatment of suicide, but mostly it was a bad game. Don't waste your money. And we covered a lot of gaming ground. Big thanks. Final thought is big thanks to our incredibly game-informed audience. Who knew that everyone in our audience knew so much about this topic? Digital behaviors about suicide, including on video games, are complex and deserve more research. Donate your data today at ourdatahelps.org. Maybe we can figure out a way to make that happen. Everybody, it's hashtag SPSM. We are so glad you're with us this week. Everybody start getting Twitch conversant because we're going there. Talk with you all soon, everyone. Take care.
Peace.
Bye.